The first sign that something was wrong came in the middle of an ordinary morning. Daniel was at his desk, staring at numbers that usually made sense to him. When his manager called his name in a tone that didn't belong in a normal day, it was sharp, controlled, and too careful. Daniel walked into the office expecting a routine question, maybe a correction, but instead he found two unfamiliar faces waiting for him. They were polite, but their eyes were not. They asked him to sit, then started talking about missing funds, unusual transfers, and access logs tied to his name. Daniel felt a strange chill, like the ground had shifted beneath him without warning. He tried to explain, but the words felt weak against the weight of their certainty. By the time the meeting ended, his world had already begun to crack. He drove home in silence, gripping the steering wheel harder than he needed to. His thoughts raced, jumping from one possibility to another, trying to make sense of something that refused to make sense. Daniel had always been careful. Numbers didn't lie, and he trusted that. So how could they now point directly at him? The question circled his mind again and again, each time louder than before. When he reached home, he expected comfort, or at least a place to think clearly. Instead, he walked into a space that already felt distant. Sarah was in the kitchen, her back turned as she stood by the counter. She didn't greet him the way she usually did. There was no smile, no simple question about his day, just silence that stretched too long. Daniel noticed it immediately. He told her what happened, choosing his words carefully, hoping she would understand, hoping she would see the truth in his voice. But Sarah didn't respond the way he expected. She listened, yes, but her eyes were guarded, as if she was already unsure. That look hurt more than anything his manager had said. Doubt had entered their home, and it didn't belong there. Ethan was in the living room, sitting on the couch with his phone. He looked up when Daniel walked in, but only for a moment. Their eyes met briefly before Ethan looked away, his expression unreadable. Daniel felt something shift inside him. Ethan had always been distant in small ways, careful with his emotions, but there had been progress over time. Small moments that meant something, a shared laugh, a simple thanks, a quiet acceptance that Daniel was part of his life. Now, all of that seemed to fade in an instant. Days passed, and the tension grew heavier. Daniel was placed on leave while the investigation continued. At first, he told himself it was just procedure, that things would clear up once the truth came out, but each day brought new questions, new doubts, and fewer answers. He spent hours reviewing his work, going over every detail, trying to find where things had gone wrong. The numbers didn't add up. The transactions were real, but they weren't his. It was as if someone had carefully constructed a path that led directly to him. At home, the distance became harder to ignore. Sarah started asking questions that felt less like support and more like suspicion. She wanted details, timelines, explanations for things Daniel couldn't explain. He answered everything honestly, but honesty didn't seem to be enough. Trust had been shaken, and once that happens, every word begins to sound uncertain. Ethan, meanwhile, grew quieter. He avoided conversations, stayed in his room longer, and rarely looked Daniel in the eye. The silence between them was louder than any argument. One evening, Daniel sat at the dinner table, waiting. The food was untouched. Sarah moved around the kitchen without saying much, and Ethan didn't come out at all. Daniel finally spoke, asking them to sit down, to talk, to face this together. Sarah hesitated but eventually joined him. Ethan followed. After a moment, his steps slow, reluctant, Daniel looked at both of them, searching for something familiar, something that reminded him of the life they had before this. He explained again, calmly, clearly, that he hadn't done what he was accused of. He told them he was trying to figure it out, that he needed their trust. Sarah listened, but her expression didn't soften. Then explain the evidence, she said quietly. Explain why everything points to you. Daniel had no answer for that. Not yet. Ethan shifted in his seat, his eyes fixed on the table. For a moment, Daniel thought he might say something, that he might speak up, defend him. or at least show some belief. But Ethan stayed silent. That silence felt like a decision. The investigation moved faster than Daniel expected. Within weeks, the company made its choice. The evidence, they said, was clear. The losses were significant, and they couldn't take the risk of waiting longer. Daniel was terminated, his position erased as if it had never been his. The official statement was careful, but the meaning was not. He had been blamed. And the world outside didn't need more than that. The legal process followed soon after. Formal, cold, and unforgiving, Daniel stood in rooms where people spoke about him as if they already knew who he was. They used words like intent and pattern, building a version of him that didn't exist. He tried to defend himself, but every argument felt smaller against a structure built around him. The evidence had been placed too precisely. It told a story, and no one seemed interested in questioning it. The hardest moment came when Sarah stopped standing beside him. At first, she had stayed quiet, uncertain but present. Then, slowly, she began to step back. She stopped attending meetings with him. She avoided conversations about the case. And eventually, she made her decision. She couldn't be with someone she didn't trust. The words were calm, but they cut deep. Daniel understood her fear, her confusion, but understanding didn't lessen the pain. Ethan's reaction was quieter, but no less powerful. He didn't argue or confront Daniel. He simply accepted what was happening in his eyes. Daniel saw something that felt like confirmation, not anger, not even disappointment, just belief in the story that had been told about him. That was the moment Daniel realized he had truly lost them. The day of the final judgment felt unreal. The room was filled with people, but Daniel felt completely alone. He listened as the decision was read, each word landing with a weight that pressed down on him. When it was over, he looked toward Sarah and Ethan one last time. Sarah's expression was distant, closed off. Ethan stood beside her, his face calm, almost unreadable. For a brief second, their eyes met. Daniel searched for something: doubt, hesitation, anything that suggested Ethan might question what had happened. But there was nothing. That look stayed with Daniel long after he walked out of that room. After everything ended, Daniel returned to an empty life. The house was gone. The routine was gone. And the people who once filled his days were no longer there. He moved into a small apartment, a place that felt temporary even after months passed. The silence there was different. It wasn't just quiet. It was heavy, filled with everything he had lost. But beneath the loss, something else began to grow. At first, it was just a thought, small and uncertain. A feeling that something didn't fit, that the story told about him was too perfect, too clean. As time passed, that thought became stronger. Daniel started to look back, not with confusion, but with purpose. He reviewed everything again, slowly, carefully. This time, he wasn't trying to defend himself to others. He was searching for the truth, and the truth, he realized, hadn't been lost. It had been hidden.